Oye, ¿qué fue lo que pasó ayer con este? Espérate. Sí. No, tú ves, me está dando trabajo. ¿Qué pasó?
My name is Luis Colazzo. I'm one of the council members. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 6:32. I understand that there's another council member that's on his way, and maybe the mayor will be joining us remotely. But I know that Councilwoman Morano has a time commitment and constraint that I want to make sure that we can go ahead and move forward with. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order.
Council Member Ruano?
Yes.
Council Member Collazo?
Present.
You may begin, Council Member.
Thank you. Before we get started, briefly just want to have a moment of silence. I know we lost some individuals here in the town. We said it at our last council meeting. I think the town is still dealing with that tragedy. And we want a quick moment of silence. Thank you. I want to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Councilwoman Marilyn Morano.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. I see that there's a lot of individuals in the public today. I don't know if there's any public comments for the workshop for us beginning, but this is a little bit different than a council meeting. It's a less formatted, more informal presentation, but there is the opportunity for public comments. So if there's anybody here for public comments, please feel free to come up to the microphone.
Good evening, everyone. Maritza Costa. I'm a 9th grade student at Hialeah Miami-Dade Senior High School. And I'm joined today by a phenomenal group of middle school students from Miami Lakes Middle who presented this past Tuesday at the Town of Miami Lakes Council meeting on public-private partnerships. And so we're very glad to join you today, and hopefully we can learn more as the town grows towards possibly establishing an ordinance regarding public-private partnerships. Thank you.
And thank you guys for being here, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules. This is not, this is a school day. You've already went through a full day of school, and now you're here adding to your educational experience. So we really appreciate it, and really shows the passion and desire you have with this issue. So thank you again. Anybody else from the public that wishes to give public comments?
Just press here? All right. Thank you so much. Good to see you, councilmen and women. My name is Silvio Pupo. I'm with Logos Capital, a local impact investment firm here in Miami. I'm also with the Government Blockchain Association. Just wanted to be weary of a couple of things. We're chatting with some of the middle school talent and obviously the next leaders of our community and some of the opportunities that I think that we're opening up here. We ourselves are applying for some grants that are environmental quality monitoring grants to continue to placate and play off of the work that's been proposed during the last year in terms of water quality, environmental quality monitoring with the schools and with the students, in a way to creatively finance some of that. Since I last came here to talk about sort of digital impact bonds and maybe how blue bonds or something like this or green bonds can be used as an innovative financing vehicle, we've been able to make progress by looking at pay-for-success models that allow us to basically implement projects and fund projects where an outcomes-based performance metric is used to be able to basically repay any private sector individuals or initiatives that get taken up by the private sector to solve public sector issues, which I think could be a really interesting mechanism to consider as we're going into this conversation, as long as there's not too many loopholes for startups or associations or consortiums that get formed to explore solution sets that ultimately meet a goal of the municipality. I think that this would solve a couple of issues. Number one is just getting everybody together to make a decision on saying, okay, we want to do something. Number two, what do we want to do? Number three, allowing innovation to actually be successful and sprout and then be able to create that outcome-based measurement in whatever innovative way the community proposes. And number four, speed the timeline to actually get anything implemented and get it funded. By being able to implement public-private partnerships or models that can allow this pay-for-performance to succeed without putting too many requirements in the way. So I think it can really be a boon for innovation to happen, and just really interested to hear what's going to be proposed today and contributing whatever I can. Thank you so much for being here today and considering this topic.
Thank you, and I remember last time we had the workshop, you were very well spoken on the issue, and really appreciate the expertise. If you hear something, if there's anything, this is new ground for us as well. Love for your feedback as well throughout the process. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Appreciate it. Okay, with that being said, I guess we're gonna go ahead and close public comments. And is there anybody online, Madam Clerk?
No, council member. I don't see any participant.
Okay, great. I guess
Thank
we'll
you.
just then close public comments and move straight into the item, which is the presentation. And thank you so much, Director Lopez. Deputy Town Manager Lopez. We've been, eagerly awaiting this. We've heard a lot of different things about what this is, what this isn't, and to have a subject matter expert within our staff, not necessarily paying a consultant, somebody who's vested in the organization, I think you add an immense wealth and knowledge to the item. So thank you so much for taking the time to do the presentation.
Thank you, Councilman. Well, good evening, everyone. And first and foremost, I want to thank you all for coming here and joining us today about this discussion that we're going to have about the topic of public-private partnerships. And, I really want to start by commending this group of students Tuesday to have a discussion about this topic, and actually had our elected officials make a motion and direct us to pursue this ordinance around public-private partnerships. And it's something that I've been studying for the past 4 years. And it was really triggered based on my time here with the town of Miami Lakes. For those of you who don't know, we have a very unique business model in comparison to a lot of other municipalities. We tend to partner or outsource a lot of our services with the private sector, when a lot of municipalities may deliver services on their own. We found that to be a much more efficient model that works for us in terms of managing and delivering a high level of quality services to our residents. And based on that, it was really what was my main driver to take a look at this a little bit closer, not only on a service level, but how can we solve the really big issues facing our communities today? The United States as a whole has a huge infrastructure issue. As of a year ago, it was rated a C, average, with over $2+ trillion worth of needs across the country. And the question is, how are we going to be able to fix these things just relying on the backs of, let's say, taxpayer dollars? Are there other ways we can accomplish and solve our infrastructure issues, not only on a national level, but also on a local level? And how can we do it efficiently on a local level? Because ultimately, it is those local governments that are the ones that have to deal with the day-to-day issues of managing our sidewalks, our streets, our stormwater, and also providing new and updated infrastructure to solve. We just heard a skate park, right? That's a piece of infrastructure that needs a solution for our youth. So how can we deliver those services in a more efficient manner and provide alternatives? And that's where public-private partnerships come in. But there's a lot of confusion around the term public-private partnerships. And to be honest, is there one clear-cut definition? There really isn't. But what we're going to be talking about today really has to do with a procurement mechanism. And it's an alternative to allow governments to partner with the private sector to deliver infrastructure and services, and hopefully in a more efficient manner, and hopefully in a way that can limit the impact on residents and taxpayers. So we're going to give you a general overview, and you've already heard a little bit of this on Tuesday from our esteemed colleagues here about P3s and what are they and what are they not in terms of context. And we have to put the context when we're talking about this term, because we've heard a lot of ways public-private partnerships have been used. And what does this mean? And what exactly, how do we manage it, and what exactly is a P3, what isn't a P3. We'll kind of go over that and kind of try to define that for you in terms of the context for our purposes as a local government. We have our deputy town attorney here who'll give you a legal overview about what our state law permits and ultimately what other cities are also doing around this topic. We'll give you those examples, and we'll also have a discussion and hopefully get a little bit of input from you all on, how should we proceed with developing an ordinance? Because there's some key factors and key issues that go into building a local ordinance around P3s that you all really need to take into account. So, what is a public-private partnership? It can mean a lot of different things. But for purposes of our discussion today, we're really looking at long-term contractual agreements. And it usually involves the government and a private party. And the biggest purpose behind that is really serving a public need for the public good. We want to deliver public services and infrastructure that the community really needs, and it's for a specific purpose. And what's unique about this mechanism is both the government and the private party share risks and benefits in trying to get that accomplished. And what you see below is kind of a continuum of types of different partnerships. All the way on the left side, you see partnerships or how the public may operate and how much public responsibility falls on that end of the spectrum. All the way to the left-hand side, where you see the private responsibility falls completely on the private sector side. Now, if you look below this little continuum here, this is when we have an existing service or facility. So we'll have service contracts, and that's typically outsourcing. That's an outsourced model. We can enter into management contracts. We've done leases before as a community for existing facilities. We may have a concession or a franchise that we may want to operate or partner with. And on that bottom side is a complete separation between the private sector and the public sector. On top, if we're looking at a new project, all the way on the left side, if we're just taking care of it ourselves, we're operating and maintaining a facility. On the other extreme, we have where the private sector will build it, own it, and operate it. But when we're talking about P3s, I really would want you all to focus on the section that says design, build, all the way to design, build, operate, and maintain. That middle section of the spectrum is what you would consider to be your typical P3. Now, one element that is missing here is financing. So that financing F can be plugged in any piece of those four up there. Because that is a big component of public-private partnerships, is that hopefully the private sector will be responsible for the financing of a respective project. And usually your basic P3 will be a design build. Private party, you identify a facility. We've talked about building a gymnasium at some point. A private party comes in, we'll fund the design and build for it and give it to you, and you guys run it. On the whole other side of the spectrum, a private party may have a partnership with a construction contractor, an architecture firm, an engineering firm, a bank, lenders, and also an operator. And they'll say, we want to partner with you to do this turnkey and offer all those elements. But note that the risk is greater when you have a lot more things bundled together. It becomes a lot more complex. So in a very simple term, what you traditionally see in a P3 is a situation where the public sector may have a piece of land. Let's say parking is an issue in our community. We want to build a parking garage. We find that us funding it ourselves is not the most efficient way to do it. A private partner, there's private operators that run parking garages. They may come in and partner with a bank and an investor and a developer and an architect and say, we can do it for you, We'll run it, we'll get profits out of it, and it still serves the public good and addresses your parking issue. So that's, in a nutshell, a very traditional type of public-private partnership. So most public-private partnerships, as I mentioned, are design builds, and the second highest are the full turnkey projects. Now, why are P3s different than, let's say, just traditional infrastructure funding and contracting? First, you have this benefit of bundling all these services together, making a project delivery much more efficient. You also transfer the risk. If we were to do it ourselves as a government, we're 100% responsible, 100% take on the risk of ensuring that a project gets done. And we've been through a couple of those, right? We've had some projects that we've had challenges with contractors. They've been delayed. We may run into cost overruns. We're able to, in a P3, to transfer that risk to a private partner. Another one is you also share decision-making. So the private sector may come with a certain level of expertise that we may not have in staff. They may be better suited to run a gymnasium or a parking garage, and they may say, we can do it for you better, faster, and also normally wouldn't have. And lastly, the biggest one is the financing itself. The ability to engage a private partner who is willing to fund a project on behalf of the city enables us, for example, not have to take a loan out and fund it ourselves. We now have the ability to have a private sector partner handle that on the city's behalf and still deliver the project that the government needs. And so I mentioned one of the key components about these partnerships are the benefits and the risks. And that's kind of the name of the game with these public-private partnerships and why they're done. Usually, a P3 can be delivered faster, and at many times 20% faster than the government doing it itself. At times, it's also less expensive. We transfer that risk that we talked about. We have access to that expertise that I mentioned, and that access to financing. But there are also risks involved. While we talked about the financing component, we may find in our assessment when we're evaluating whether or not we want to do a P3 that our bond financing rates may be more advantageous than what the private sector can offer us.
Tony, I have a question of,
Sure.
of that transfer of risk that you're talking about. From conceptual to, from taking something that's conceptual and then you start applying it, and let's say your figures were off. Right? I'm going to use one of the name me one of the examples that you're talking about. The skate park, you mentioned the skate park. Right, so we have a vendor comes in, they want to do the skate park, and they're going to charge kids an entry fee, and let's say that their models are off and they don't meet that. What happens there in that situation? Who bears the burden of that risk? The vendor defaults, or does that fall back on the city, or is that all in the contracts of how you?
Yeah, and that hits on the second risk, right? Complex procurement and contracting. And I think you hit it right on the head in the sense of one of the biggest risks in these deals is we hope that we have a proper assessment in the front end to ensure that those projections or their pro formas or whatever they're sharing with us are indeed accurate and would reflect a payback, a legitimate payback where a operator may not default or may not leave. We hope that's the case. But it's also been the case in many public-private partnerships. So in those cases, it really depends on the strength of your contract and what are the safeguards that you put in that contract in the case of a vendor defaulting. We may require a bond in the case a contract defaults to transition to another operator. Many times, that's one of why it's such a big risk is many communities end up having to support an operator on the back end. They may have to publicly support them through financing to help them survive. Maybe the first few years aren't as profitable as expected. That's a risk that we share. We got the infrastructure, but we share also that risk. If a vendor then leaves, we may be stuck with this infrastructure now and may have to operate it or have now delays trying to find another vendor or operator. So a lot of that really has to do with the complexity of the procurement and the contract itself. A lot of times you have few bidders for these types of projects because it is, in essence, a major undertaking with so many elements involved. And we talked about that shared decision-making as being something different, but at the same time, has control in these types of arrangements. We may not have the ability to make changes that we want to see unless our contract dictates it. So that all goes back to the contract, right? Another big thing is not well understood by citizens. And one big misconception about P3s, they're not free money. They're not free money. And that's one thing that I really want to emphasize is whenever investors coming and they want to make sure that they build a certain investment, their goal is to make a return on that investment and ultimately, hopefully, profit from that. And that also creates questions in citizens. Who are these partners? Are they able to support it? There's also a little questions about transparency of who are these operators? Are they legitimate? Will they be here for the long term, for the 30 years? Just like you mentioned that, will they default? All those things are challenges with lack of transparency. And there's one current project right now, the city of Miami is dealing with the potential P3 to build a soccer stadium on a golf course. And that project is ongoing in negotiations. There's a lot of questions from the public. What's going to be happening? Who's going to pay for all this? So P3s come with a lot of these types of challenges. So you may be wondering, what is an example of a P3 that may have been done here in Miami-Dade County? The Port of Miami Tunnel was a P3. And they were able to get that $900 million investment through a P3 conglomerate and developer in exchange for the availability payments of user fees from cruise ship users. Another P3 that's currently ongoing is also the Miami-Dade County Courthouse. And talking about those examples, we see P3s typically in two different sections. We have economic type of infrastructure and social infrastructure. All of these types of projects, and if you see a theme here, again, we're talking about larger type infrastructure, where it's a situation where a community may not be able to self-fund that need. Looking for alternatives that they may not have to take on the burden of financing themselves. Miami-Dade County alone has a good book or list of potential projects stemming from water and sewer to their courthouse to corrections that are all potential P3 projects. So for you all that are studying this, you may want to go online and take a look at some of those projects as you start thinking about the ordinance.
Tony, you mentioned two specifically, and I just wanted to go back. You said the tunnel, and you said that it was attached to a fee that I guess cruise ship passengers take.
Yeah.
So every time you buy a cruise ship ticket, there's a tunnel fee.
Correct.
What was the other
And
one?
on top of that, there's tolls that you pay through the tunnel, and
Got
that's
it.
shared.
So you have the per ticket fee, and then you pay the tolls as a usage fee. What was the other one? I didn't catch
The
it.
courthouse,
And how is that?
Miami-Dade County Courthouse.
So is there a court fee, I guess, or is there a?
You have the, well, from what I understood, there's court fees, there's also rental space. There's also likely going to be deals with the vendors and concession deals. So it stems from a lot of variety of places. So now I'll transfer it over to our Deputy Town Attorney, Lorenzo Cobia.
This is where the ordinance is going to come in. Well, do any of the students have any questions so far? Okay.
Thank you very much, Councilman Cuiazo. Thank you very much, Councilwoman, I'm sorry, Rano. I want to thank our manager, Ed Peterman, and Tony Lopez, for allowing me to work on this project with them, and for our staff members, Jeremy, man, I'm like all thumbs tonight, Jeremy and Natalie, for working together. So the reason the four of us have been meeting since November, I think, working on this and talking about this and how we're going to present this to you. And so it's been a fun project, and P3s are the little clicker. Thank you. It's interesting because it's innovative law. Law is something that, for anybody interested in studying law, one of the things that's interesting about the way that law is written is that law lags way behind technology. So technology and ideas and innovations move much faster, and the law is always trying to catch up with it, right? And this type of innovative way of thinking, of solving social problems, is something that in other countries that can move their legal process a lot faster, or the government has a lot more control over what happens in the private sector, have moved a lot quicker. Something that I've learned in conversations with our deputy town manager is that countries like China, for instance, that have a very centralized type government, and the government really has a lot of control of what happens in the private sector, use P3s all the time. Countries like the United States lag way behind other countries in the world in P3s, but that's also part of what makes this country great, right? Because in order for governments to be able to spend and use public dollars, the public needs to have transparency. The public needs to understand where those tax dollars are being spent, how they're being used, right? How the government is making a decision as to who is going to be the vendor, how that vendor is chosen, right? And so we have this really clunky system, okay, that sometimes we wonder why we have that, called procurement, okay? And procurement is really these bodies of law, right? And we have a manager actually that just deals with that and deals with contracts that the town has, which is Natalie, Mr. Nanda, sorry, that deals just with this particular issue. Why? Because it's so clunky, it's so big, right? And so what allows P3s to happen is a modification of those laws in order to be able to allow a private company with an idea to approach a city and be able to make sure that to some extent that information is kept kind of private, that the city's able to talk to that company, but still be able to maintain that transparency, maintain that fairness, maintain that understanding where people can come and understand where those tax dollars are spent. So I wanted to lay that as a foundation as to what this law is and where it is, and why it's kind of neat, because it's really kind of cutting edge as far as the law is concerned. And it's a relatively new law. This came out in 2013, more or less. State of Florida was actually one of the first states, believe it or not, in the entire United States, really to develop a P3 ordinance, and it developed it as Statute 33430, okay? And this statute was specific just to road transportation, all right? And as our deputy town manager alluded, one of the main projects was the Port of Miami. It was one of the major projects. Another one was Interstate 595, and you had toll plazas, and that's how that was financed. On the heels of that, all right, the state legislature started thinking about, well, how can we apply these types of economic P3 projects and create social P3 projects so that we can build hospitals, so that we can look at stadiums, so that we can look at other types of facilities that are necessary for government. And so they created an initial statute, which was 287.0712, right? Now that changed and evolved, because one of the things that the government did at that time, and the legislature did at that time, is that they were thinking, okay, so we're going to allow government to do this, but we want to be able to see how local governments can go ahead and create their own ordinances and their own processes so that it can trickle down to counties and to municipalities, right? Because we've got different levels of government. You got the state, and then it and state agencies, and then you've got local governments, which are your counties and your municipalities. And so they created a task force, and that task force came back with some suggestions, and in about 2016, they came back with suggestions as to how local governments could create those ordinances. And so that's where we have 255065, all right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit how that process works. So there's two types of proposals. There's the unsolicited proposal and there's a solicited proposal. So an unsolicited proposal looks like someone that operates, let's say, a gymnasium, right? And they've got a wonderful model for a gymnasium, and they've got a great fee structure, and they come to the town and they say, listen, you guys have that project that I'm hearing about, that buzz in Optimist, and I've got this wonderful idea. I want to build you a gymnasium, all right? And I've got the builder, he's great. I've got the architect, he knows what he's doing. I've got the supplier, and I'm going to operate it for you. And so they come in with the bid. Another one could be solicited. We're going out there, we've got an idea, we don't know how to do it, we're not sure what's the right way, and so we would talk to Natalie, we tell Natalie, hey, listen, we want to do X, Y, Z, and Natalie would go back and give us a kind of a sketch, and we should put out a request for qualifications. So we go out there and we start getting unsolicited proposals, people from out there that may have the expertise that we're looking for to build this kind of project and come to us, right? So there's two types. Now, one of the most important things that the statute establishes is a reasonable application fee, all right? And I'm going to talk about what a reasonable application fee is, and that's something that you want to start thinking about. Why a reasonable application fee? And why do you need a reasonable application fee? Well, we just said we're government, right? We're not experts in this area. We don't know necessarily what a gymnasium costs to operate, to build, to construct. We know we may want one. We know that it may be something good for our residents, but we don't know what that looks like, okay? So we need to either have a committee to kind of hash out and say, all right, listen, this company knows what they're doing. Yeah, they do have that good contractor. Yeah, this is going to work. Yeah, they're going to be able to sustain this. This is feasible for them to build it and to sustain it, and they're going to make their money back. And we're comfortable that they're not going to be coming back 2-3 years from now and asking the council, hey, we need more money because we can't sustain this, or it's going to fail. Because you don't want this project to fail. You want it to last long, because if not, then it becomes a burden on the residents, a burden on the citizens. So you got to hash out the project. So the reasonable application fee is the fee that you collect so that you can start studying that project, or you can hire a consultant to go ahead and study that. And we'll touch upon that a little bit later. Okay, the other part is you've got to publish in the Florida Administrative Register, in a newspaper of general circulation, and ask for additional proposals. So during this period of time, you have to collect that information, okay? You've got to establish first, okay, is this a good idea, all right? You got to accept that reasonable application fee. And then you also have to do what number 3 says, and maybe number 3 should be number 1, which is, does this really serve a public purpose? Is this something that makes sense in the town? Is this something that we really want and that's in the best interest of our residents? Okay, so it is. We collect the fee, we hash it out, and so now we're going to publish it. Another point that's not listed up here is, and that it makes it attractive for people, because the one thing, and we'll add another layer of complexity to this and clunk to it, right, is that we've got this thing called public records law, and which means that anything that we do here in government is open to the public. Okay, any document that we publish, anything that we receive, any email that's written, anything, don't start getting ideas, is a public record. Okay, you ask for it, we got to give it to you. And so if you are someone, you've got a great idea for doing something, and you come to the town and you say, hey, look, I'm the best, and these are my secrets, and I'm going to give you my secrets, I'm going to give you my books, I'm going to let you examine it. You don't want that necessarily to become a public record, because now you're giving the competition an eye-in as to what you can do, right? So Florida law allows an exception to public records while it's going through the bidding process, and it also allows an exception if the town decides to terminate it for a period of time to kind of protect that entity and offer them kind of, some level of protection that they're not just going to be giving away their secrets and not have an opportunity really to make a gain, right, during that process. So it kind of helps them out a little bit. All right, so public purpose, we can do unsolicited proposals, there's a reasonable application fee, and there's the need to allow other people to bid on the project during a period of time, and notice. Okay, notice is very important. There's two parts that come next: the approval process and the qualifications process. Okay, so the public entity needs to meet, besides going ahead and approving it. In order to approve it, we need to figure out a description of the project. We need their design, a proposal, services, schedule. We need a description of the public entity's general plan for financing, how they're going to get money, what are their user fees, lease payments, what is that all going to look like. Then they also need to meet a certain amount of qualifications. Ensure that the entity's performance and the payments of their associates and suppliers, how they're going to pay it, ensure that it's efficient pricing. Basically make sure that everything that they're doing is fair, it's equitable, and it's going to, again, be a good use. Remember, they're making a partnership with us. We're the public entity. We are the guardians of the people. We're the guardians of the people, of the taxpayer dollars. So we got to make sure that certain things, we need to apply a high level of scrutiny to these projects. Next thing is notice, okay? Regional public entity has to notify not only its citizens and its residents and other vendors. We also need to provide notice to local jurisdictions, right? Because what we're doing here, and if accepting a project, right, that's either whether it's solicited or unsolicited, may have an impact on surrounding neighborhoods. It may have an impact on service that's being provided in our neighboring cities. So what we do here could have a regional impact. And so we need to provide them notice and see if that impact is something that is going to affect them and they would have an objection to. And so it provides that within 60 days of that publication, they can go ahead and submit a formal objection or complaint or comment as to the project. Then once you have an agreement, there is the ability to create an interim agreement and a final comprehensive agreement. The interim agreement could be, all right, we like your idea, we're going to pick you, and so for the time being, you're going to build a gymnasium. I'm using the gymnasium as an example. Let's use the skate park as an example, switch it around. You're going to build a skate park. I want to know for the skate park, okay, go ahead and start doing your design, get your architect in place, go ahead and do your surveys, go ahead and do whatever you need to do to start getting that skate park in line. And in the interim, we're going to go ahead and start creating that final comprehensive agreement, right? Because one thing is getting the skate park in line, right? Building it, getting it there. But in that final agreement, there's certain things that we need to start thinking about. We got to think about, like, for instance, how are we going to share in revenue, right? Is there going to be a share in revenue? Or are you going to give preference to, let's say, folks that are from the town versus people that are not coming? We're going to make sure that how are we going to create safety protocol? What's going to happen if you don't necessarily have sufficient revenue? I mean, is the town going to be responsible to pitch in? And also, one of the most important things, which I'm going to touch up next, is what happens once the project ends. So the project has a lifespan of 30 years. At the end of 30 years, does the project become part of go back to the owner? Does the owner get to keep the park forever, and now it's the responsibility of the private provider, not the owner, the private provider? Or does it go back to the city, to the responsible party? Does it come back to us, and now it becomes ours? In most P3 agreements, it reverts back to the local government. That's how it works. And so from this, any questions, by the way? I'm speaking very fast. So if there's something I've said you haven't understood, please stop me and ask questions, okay? Ordinance examples, the best one is Miami-Dade County. So at the same time that the state was creating its task force, Miami-Dade County, this one particular commissioner, Commissioner Zapata, led kind of took the charge of that. Was we need to create our own task force. We need to figure out, as the state is figuring out, we've got to figure out what we're going to do here locally. So once the state figures out what they're going to allow us to do, we're already ahead of the curve. And they did that, and it was a very good ordinance that they created. The task force, what they did is, and they broke it down into 4 parts that we can really do is, number 1 is that the creates a standard for preparation and planning, 2 for project screening, 3 for advertisement, and of a 2-step P3 process of an RFQ and RFP and 4 for contracting. I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of them. Preparation and planning, that's key. We need to understand when that application comes to the town, how is it going to be vetted? Who is the entity that's going to receive it, and how is it going to funnel to figure out, does it meet that public purpose? Is it something that we want, so that we can go on to the next step? Because the first question is, do we want it? Is it something that we need? Does it meet a public purpose? If it doesn't, maybe we don't go forward with it. Maybe we can it at the inception. The second part is, or maybe we go the project screening. Okay, so we know who it's going to go to. Now we're going to go through that process of screening the project. Maybe it goes first to staff. Staff takes a look at it. Okay, it meets these it meets the boxes. It's a public purpose. It's something that we really want. And then we present it to the council, and the council says, okay, move forward and start working on the project. Then the other part is, and a part of the project screening too is, once it kind of meets all that criteria is, then we need to collect that application fee. We got to figure out what that application fee is going to be, and then start the actual due diligence of taking a look at that company's books, taking a look at their history, seeing how it is that their methodology, and making sure that it's a solid company, someone that is reputable, somebody that we can really work with and move forward with.
Lorenzo, I have a question.
Yeah.
So far, I'm following up. By the way, great job. Thank you both, because you've really made it understandable, at least for somebody who's had no previous experience, and I'm pretty sure for the class as well, you know, kind of getting really into it, and making sure that it's balanced, right? That's what I'm getting, that there has to be a checks and balance throughout the process. The application fee,
Yep.
I'm assuming in what you've said, is to cover whatever cost we incur from either hiring consultants or, you know, looking at because projects can range in all types of sizes, scope. How do you come down with that? As you're going to be tasked with creating an ordinance, right? How do you do that in such a manner that it's also fair and not cost prohibitive, where we're deterring, you know, on these? I've gone ahead. I'm sorry. Sometimes I skip through and I go through so I've gone. I see projects here in the $500,000 range, right? Not even breaking $1 million or
Right.
10 million, like some of the other projects, right? You would want to keep that fee, right, at a certain percentage where it doesn't make it cost prohibitive, right? If you put $100,000 on a $500,000 project, and it might be the fee that's necessary for us to evaluate that. You know, I can see how that might be a deterrent for the project itself. So
Yeah, and when we go to the next slide, you'll see cities approach in a few different ways. Where, for example, if you want to just, and Natalie was going to talk a little bit, it ranges from 5,000 all the way up to 25,000, right? And you can always put a minimum amount, and then if there's additional costs, we come back to the provider and tell them, this is actually going to cost us more than this. At the same time, you also kind of want to weed out people that are serious about actually putting a serious investment. When we're talking about, even if it's $500,000, they have to have a little bit of skin in the game up front, understanding that they're serious about this. So this is one of the reasons that a lot of these entities have put these application fees, to ensure that it's people that have a legitimate interest and that they are legitimately going to go through the process. If the review doesn't cost, or doesn't cost the city the $25,000, it's reimbursed. Okay, but at the same time, it's kind of a commitment from the private proposer that's doing an unsolicited proposal. It's a kind of I would say, a good faith initiative saying, we're serious. We know you're going to spend a lot of staff time evaluating. You may need expertise that's not in-house, that's going to cost the city money. We want to move forward. This is our idea. We think it's a good idea, and this is our initial investment into it. Exactly. And that's why we're presenting 3 different levels of options, where you all can actually start from a certain amount and move up. But So it really depends on kind of what aim the community wants in terms of using this procurement mechanism for. Because P3s, and I'll go in the next slide, not everything is a P3. Not everything qualifies, or we may merit that we want to use a P3 to fund it. We may say a $500,000 investment, we may want to take out our own loan to do it. And that's part of that evaluation process. Is the P3 a better option, or doing it on our own a more cost-effective option? And that's part of that process. So. Mhm. So
We're not under any obligation to accept the $25,000 to accept the project. So at the very beginning
Okay.
of the project, that's why I was saying.
And we'll go,
we
yeah.
have to have that preparation and planning.
And there's, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
council member, there's a slide coming up about the
About
process.
evaluation process.
And the vetting, the multiple steps that, and one of them is like a threshold decision early on. Does this fulfill a public policy? Is this something that the elected officials want to pursue? If yes, then we move on to subsequent steps.
That was one of my questions. I know that a lot of people have ideas, and they'd like to, either run a program or whatever their ideas is. People call us all the time with ideas. Not every idea is a good idea. Not every idea is something that we want to pursue, right? Because even if it does serve a public purpose, it might just not be something that we're looking to do.
Correct.
So in that respect, right, I would like this fee to be substantial.
Well,
Because if not, then every Tom, Dick, and Harry that has a brilliant idea is just going to walk to the door with a $100 check and say, hey, take a look at my idea.
absolutely, and that's kind of why, and maybe I wasn't clear, my bad, that the county really broke it out into 4 steps, and I think it's important for us to understand that. So first, preparation and planning. Let's go through that step. Idea comes in, who gets the idea, who makes the initial step, who makes the final step, before we even accept the $25,000. Okay, we like it, accept the $25,000, flush out the company, see if it's feasible, see if it can be done. Okay, you've met that step. All right, now we've got to solicit. Okay, because now we got to go through the procurement process. Even though we like it, even though you are a good company, even though we like your idea, we want to go with you, we can't. We've got to allow other people to compete.
Okay.
And so what the county does, it's interesting, is they do an RFQ and an RFP process. Okay, the RFQ process is request for qualifications. Send it out to a bunch of people. Let everybody bid and send their qualifications as to why they're the better company to do that P3 project. Once that's done, and one of the things that they do is the RFQ goes to the BCC first. Okay? They like it. All right. Now let's put it to an RFP. Now, that RFQ, what happens is that once that RFQ goes out, it goes back to the BCC. The BCC looks at everyone that submitted their proposals, and they shortlist it. And now that shortlist goes out for an RFP, and those folks go ahead and bid on the project. And then it's finally proven. So there's several steps where the public is seeing exactly what's coming in, who's bidding on the project, how that process is being shortlisted, and then the final product is coming out.
And the step where, for example, this council would decide if it serves a purpose that we're interested in pursuing, that would be a step that would happen early on.
Yeah, and when we get to that slide briefly, it'll be, that's one of the feedback steps that we need from you, because some cities make it an administrative process.
Okay.
They'll and determine whether or not it meets even a need, whether it even can sustain itself. But we can also put in the process and follow a very similar process to this, where it comes to you all. We receive this proposal, this idea. Do you all want us to even take an administrative review of it?
Okay. I mean, if there's a fee involved and it'll cover the cost of administrative time, I wouldn't have a problem with staff looking at it early on and then bringing it back if it's a feasible project. But we have a bad habit of exploring stuff up here. We do a lot of exploring, and that takes a lot of time from all of you, and that's not what we're here to do.
One of the things that I've discussed with Deputy Town Attorney, and I can give you names, I don't want to name cities, but there are some cities out there that, many cities that decide, well, we're just going to use a statute. What I don't like about that approach is, I think you need to have clear step-by-step as to where it goes first, how it goes next, what money you're going to accept as that application fee, so that it's got that level of transparency and it works for the town. And so I think that's why I wanted to kind of go step by step and show you how you got to the statute, what the county did, and what you can do. And Natalie can talk to you a little bit more because she did a lot of research as to the different cities, what you can do, what the other cities are doing, that are maybe they have little nuances to all this. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Natalie.
Thank you. Okay, so we did some research and came back with some municipal ordinances from our neighboring cities, from City of Miami, City of South Miami, and City of North Miami Beach. And I believe the students from Miami Lakes Middle, you guys provided an example from City of Sweetwater for the application fee. Thank you, guys. So as you can see, City of Miami has a $25,000 application fee. City of South Miami has $10,000, and City of North Miami Beach has a $5,000. So this application fee is basically an estimate of how much it would cost for the town to evaluate the proposals. So like Tony and Lorenzo had mentioned, sometimes the evaluation can't be done in-house because we don't have the proper expertise, so a consultant would have to be hired, and this is where that number comes from. And again, like Lorenzo touched on, the statute allows us to go back and ask for more money if the initial application fee is not enough to conduct the evaluation. And some examples on the competitive solicitation process, basically it can't be any less than 21 days, which it's in line with the procurement process. When procurement puts out a solicitation, it can't be out for less than 21 days, 3 weeks. And typically it would be out for 120 days. So it's an extensive process, but I believe it's necessary to do the right thing. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tony.
Thank you, Natalie. And ultimately, Natalie's shop will be the owner of this ordinance because it is a procurement mechanism. And that's why it's critical for your feedback. But more importantly, you know, what makes these types of arrangements successful? And a lot of the research I conducted was around what are those factors that really drive the success of these projects. And it really takes evaluation and a close look at each and every one of these proposals. More importantly, to ensure is sustainability. We don't want a partner to come in, promise the world, and leave a year later. We want a partner that is actually going to follow through with that commitment and will agree to safeguards, performance measures that they have to meet. So here's an example of, initially, we may want administrative review to determine feasibility. Is this even something that can be done? And what they're saying, is it supported with actual documentation? You know, one of these great examples is the Marlin Stadium. They may not have had the full documentation when they made the decision. We don't want that situation to happen in any type of our projects. Consultant support may be required. A lot of times we'll turn to an agency that reviews these, and they have a model that they follow and provide a recommendation, and we'll have to make an acceptance and rejection decision on whether or not we want to move forward with this unsolicited proposal. Regardless if we solicit ourselves or have it an unsolicited process, it still needs to go through a competitive solicitation. RFQs and RFPs are used. We have evaluation committee, and ultimately the council would make any approvals on a final P3 project decision. And I laid out here just kind of an example at the bottom of what the thought process is when we're looking at P3s. And more importantly, if we were soliciting ourselves, we'd say we have a facility need. And we'd say, is this even worthy of doing a P3? That's the first question. And like I mentioned, we may decide that it may be better served that we build it ourselves, we finance ourselves, and we control it ourselves, and not run that risk or share that risk with someone else. Then we would appraise the whether or not this P3 is attractive to the market, and whether a P3 is a good idea. Another big component of this is that return on investment, the value for money. And there's actually a formula involved with this, but that value for money component determines whether the P3 is actually going to provide the financial benefits to both parties that they're seeking? And that will it provide a good value? Then after all that, we'll determine what'll make this project a success. And we'll look at factors, you know, the relationship between the private party and the public sector has to be looked at. The project management components. How are we managing this project? What are the safeguards in place have to be evaluated? The economic factors. So, and lastly, we need to determine whether or not this P3 is actually going to be attractive to the private sector, right? Is it worthy of a private party to put in, let's say, a $5 million investment onto our public land to do this? Will we only have one bidder because no one else is interested? And we don't want to necessarily run into that situation either, because we run a greater risk that they may not perform. So I'll also turn it over here to Jeremy just to briefly talk about the current proposals that we've received.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Lopez. So after hearing a little bit about what these P3s are and how they function and some of their benefits versus their cons, this is going to put into context some of the current partnership proposals we have received to date. So we have received 3 of these partnership proposals, ranging from the building of an outdoor soccer facility that is covered, all the way through building, as we mentioned earlier, an entire gymnasium. These projects range from hundreds of thousands of dollars all the way to millions of dollars. As you can see, the 3 current options I'll go through really quickly, as we've gone through these in previous workshops before as well, is there's a development of an indoor soccer center for programming, rentals, and public use. They're expected at a 20 to 25,000 square foot facility. They are proposing to accommodate anywhere from 30 to 70 individuals at a given time. Operations throughout the entire day. This first option here that you're seeing is actually going to be privately operated and maintained. This is the only one that has been designated to be that design, build, operate, and maintain. At the estimated cost there, you'll see anywhere between $250,000 to $500,000. They're the only providers at the time that have provided where their source of financing will come from. Looking at the next option we have here is the development of an indoor recreational facility for, once again, programming, rentals, and public use. As you'll yes.
Before we jump on, like, real quick, and I think I understand from, I just want to make sure I'm following along. You guys received this, right? You're doing the numbers. You say there's no way possible we can build a 25,000 square foot facility for anywhere close to this number. You know, there's something off here. Somebody missed a comma, a zero. At that point in time, what do you do? Right, you give the people back their money, or you still put them through this consultant thing? There's something glaringly wrong about the number. What do you do at that point?
We can always ask for documentation from a bank or investment firm or whoever's their lender that supports their numbers, a pro forma of their business. There's additional documentation that can be asked for from a preliminary basis. How are you coming up with this? Then that documentation will ultimately need to be evaluated holistically by an expert. Right? We have a financial expert that can make that assessment and say, yeah, this is legitimate, this really will work or wouldn't.
Because the other thing that I've learned, I before being in this position, I only understood, you know, home ownership in the private sector. I understand that here we have other requirements, right? We're building to institutional grade, right, or you know, LEED certification, which, you know, individuals who are coming in and maybe only have this private sector experience and see this as a investment opportunity. And that's where I was coming from, that your standards or your design standards or your build standards are different. How do you put that into the process early enough where we're not getting a bunch of unsolicited proposals saying, you know, thinking that it might be a lot cheaper than what it cost?
Well, ideally, those unsolicited proposals will come with an application fee that will support that evaluation. And this is what the beauty of this concept of doing this ordinance is, to clarify those steps for those proposers, to have an application that spells out exactly the initial documentation that needs to be supporting your proposal. It can't just be a one-page document. We need to see detail. And that detail with your application fee will then go through a pretty rigorous evaluation just to even determine whether or not we want to move forward. The end result is we don't want to present a bad deal to you and ultimately the community and ultimately the taxpayers.
And because the information being provided right now is very limited, there's also conversations that happen after the fact that by indoor it could just mean covered roof. So, but all that, building this ordinance, building that level of criteria necessary to even be submitted is going to play a pivotal role to identify exactly what is a qualifying project and what is not. Just continuing up with that second option, we'll be looking at they'll be looking at three full basketball courts, dedicating one court at all times to the public for full public use to be used in the mornings, and then their private use where they would be operating from 3 till the closure of the park. They're looking at privately operating it during their time span there, and programming it for both youth and adult programming. Their estimated cost is anywhere between $2 to $3 million. Financing is to be sought through private loans, sponsorships, and/or donations. And the third one is actually a little more special tailored. This one actually involves your guys' school area. But this project is aimed at developing or advancing on top of the outdoor basketball courts that are already built at Miami Lakes Optimist to develop an airnasium, a covered structure that would enclose at least the roof structure of the basketball courts so use can be extended during times of foul weather, as well as into the night with lighting. So this is aimed at anywhere from 25,000 square feet, and they are actually the ones looking at a program where it would be designed, built, and leased before turning it back on over to the town. They're looking at covering all four outdoor basketball courts, operating from the time allowed to run private programming from 5 to 10. They are looking to also run both youth and adult programming. Their estimated cost is just slightly over $500,000, and at this point, no financial information has been submitted. One caveat to this one proposal we received was it was contingent on them running a program prior to any development of any of the potential proposed item, which is the airnasium. Due to that contingency, this is technically outruled from being the P3, going through the P3 process. That running of a program would need its own solicitation and competitive bidding process standalone. It was. It was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick. I need to excuse myself, but I wanted to thank you all for an amazing presentation because I've learned a lot more today than I ever thought I would about P3s. I kind of thought that I knew what they were, but this is a lot more cumbersome than I ever imagined. So I really appreciate you shedding light on all of these things, and I'll have lots of questions for when the ordinance gets drafted or put together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
And with that, I will go ahead and hand it back on over to Dr. Lopez.
So, I mean, right on time, we're going to be entering our discussion, and I just wanted, again, to really, commend and share with you all the great work that you all have done in proposing to move forward with an ordinance. The importance of this is great, and the main reason for that is realize that only 16% of cities can self-fund their infrastructure. 16% of cities in this country can self-fund their infrastructure. That's what latest stats are showing. So providing alternatives to fund projects, coming up with innovative ways to support services for the public good is where this ordinance comes in. And so it's a great thing, and a great thing that I think the community is moving forward with in putting together an ordinance. So I want to also thank the team, Lorenzo, Jeremy, and Natalie. Thank you so much for supporting the presentation. And some of the discussion points here, we're talking about this ordinance. consider what the application fee would be, your goals for actual cost recovery, not only in the evaluation process, but also in the project development, the process itself, and ultimately who's approving what and when. So those are some of the feedback points to be considered.
First off, like, wonderful presentation. It really was insightful, so thank you guys so much. It really does, like, the work paid off. We, I think, knew some of the material, but definitely went more in depth in it here, so that was definitely really good for us to be here, so thank you so much for that. It's actually funny that you mentioned the proposals, because we have spoken to the two gentlemen who proposed the first two, so we do have a bit of a more personified, like, interaction with those two proposals. I don't know if any of you guys have any questions before I go through my notebook. No one's got, okay. Okay, so maybe I didn't catch on to this, or maybe I didn't catch on to this, or maybe it wasn't clear to me, but we were talking a lot about financing. And I never really got to the part where we were talking about how the private sector was going to bring into financing, because we're talking about public-private partnerships, and we're talking about how it's going to help government essentially pay less and, like, be more effective towards, like, economically. But we were talking a lot about, like, only application fees, and I'm just wondering, how do we, and maybe this goes into the ordinance, how do we set up a guideline to make sure that the private sector throughout the whole process is going to be economically available to, like, be able to provide this financing that they will be put up for?
And that's a great point. I think if you looked at that evaluation slide, during that evaluation process, we have to ensure that all the financial documentation is legitimate and can actually support the value of that project. We not only need to see the ability of the group to finance the project, but we also need to ensure that they have the ability to obtain the capital throughout the life of the project and be able to actually have enough to support the operation and maintenance, not just the 1 year the project's being built. We need to see that for the next 30 years.
And I also, like, have a question. We were talking about, like, reasonable application fees, and, like, some of the examples given were cities that are much bigger than ours, and I'm just wondering, how do we set up a calculation? How do we set up a number? Would we essentially, instead of setting up strict numbers like that, could we, like, go into maybe setting up, like, a formula, say, like, one of the projects, it's estimated for, like, $1 million, and we say, okay, for the application fee, we are going to initially tell you to give the town around 5% to 15% for us to evaluate, and then see how we can move on with this.
I think that's kind of where some of the councilman's questions were stemming. It's possible. However, keep in mind that if we say 5% out of a $50,000 project, that may not cover our costs. So we need to be able to have a number that covers our costs to evaluate the project. Are there ways that we can definitely look at that closer and talk about ideas of how we can get to different thresholds? Absolutely. We can also have a base threshold, kind of like North Miami Beach does, of $5,000. And if there are more costs, we can tell the proposer, we've evaluated our costs for this project, regardless of the amount of the project. This is how much it's going to cost us. This is the application fee. So there are different ways we can definitely look at that. And some of these projects could be $500,000. They could be $5 million. So if we take 10% of $5 million, now that application fee is a lot larger, and it may still take up the same amount of time for us to evaluate it, right? So it really has to do with a calculation that we have to come up with our own staff time, or how much the average consultant will cost to start the evaluation process.
Yeah, because I was talking about, like, setting up flexibility to make sure that we're, like, able to proceed with all of that economically. And also, like, I do have a question, because we do talk about, like, P3s, and we think about them as things that are for the public, and essentially the public is going to be the ones affected. And you went into transparency, and now my question is, how do we like assure the public that whoever is coming in and working with the government is going to be transparent not only to the government but to them as the people who are eventually going to get affected by whatever project is built or made?
And I think, again, that's the strength of the ordinance and in terms of our evaluation process. If you saw the counties, and as Lorenzo mentioned, from each step, all that is publicly available, with the exception of the public record exemption for unsolicited proposals while it's going through the process. So ensuring that everything is publicly available each step of the way, ensuring that we build into our ordinance that the projects come in front of the public and get discussed by the public on a regular basis, that there's community input, there's notice to surrounding communities. All those steps will be built in. And some communities have even gone as far as putting it out to vote to the public. Do we want this? City of Miami wants to build a soccer stadium. They want it, it's a P3 project. They put it out to the voters. And then now the details have to be going on. And so the transparency issue really has to do with how much we're going to be sharing with the public and following all those steps along the way and ensuring that the people that represent the public have the say at the right steps.
And that would come within the guidelines of the ordinance.
Exactly.
Okay, and then I have one last question because I was doing some research into like more like private P3s, and I came into real estate brownfield P3s, which are basically P3s that have pre-existing infrastructure. And I'm asking, like outside of real estate, like in general, if the town were to solicit a P3 with a pre-existing infrastructure, how would we go from there?
Well, I think the first step is we identify a need. So if we have a need for a facility somewhere and we say we want a gymnasium, we start the solicitation process at that point. We want a gymnasium, we're asking the private sector to propose their ideas for what a gymnasium will look like at Optimus Park. That will be our first step in the process. We'll make sure that in the RFQ process they have the designers, the architects, the engineers, the bank, the lenders, the people that are going to operate it, if they decide they want to operate it, have an operator. We'll go through that process and then have a competition. And that competition will ultimately decide who gets to build a gymnasium.
Yeah, but my question was more of, let's say we already have like a supermarket and all of a sudden they want to turn this, the Town of Miami Lakes decides, and this is just a random example, we want to turn this old supermarket into a roller skating rink. But we don't think we necessarily want to do it by ourselves. We want to work with the private sector. How do we go from already having this infrastructure to getting a contract?
So again, how do we go from there? We would say we want to build a roller skating rink. We put it out to the public and say who is willing to partner with us to build a roller skating rink. And from there we'll get people that are interested. We'll then select that group that is interested in designing it and what it's going to look like. We'll have a contract for that. Then after that, part of that contract was who's going to pay for it, who's going to operate it. All of that will be as part of that initial step of that process. And then from there, we have another solicitation once we design it and know what it's going to look like, and then we're going to have another contract after that for construction. So we'll have a contract for the preparation and who the partner is going to be. That's who's going to secure that. And then we have another contract to actually look at who's going to be delivering the project.
Do you guys have any questions? 'Cause
Hello, I'm Marissa Costa, assistant coach for the Miami Lakes legal team. I just want to thank everyone, being very welcoming to the students, allowing them to speak at the previous meeting. Your presentation was excellent. Everyone involved, you guys did a great job in presenting. My question is more towards now the actual process of developing the ordinance. Obviously, staff has to start working on this. What do you guys see as an estimated timeline? And would you guys be open to maybe involving the students in some steps? Because I know they'd love to be involved any research you need to be done, anything at all, they'd love to continue working on this project and see it through.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, and legal can, I don't know what the timetable you have in mind.
I think that as far as timetable, thanks to you, the council did give us clear direction to come back to them with an ordinance. So that's already put in motion. I think that they're putting together an ordinance in first reading is possible to put together. I think there's going to be some questions that at an ordinance in first reading, which is a little atypical, we're going to need some answers from you based on this workshop, because there's some fill in the blanks. And perhaps you can also offer some out-of-the-box suggestions. So I'm thinking April, we might be able to bring back an ordinance in first reading and then start beating that up at that point. We're pretty packed for March, so I would think April would be the earliest.
And I would challenge, if you guys have any ideas that are stemming from what you just heard in some of these points, feel free to send them over.
And I would add, you know, you have a council member that's also coaching you, right? That's been helping you through along the way, and I think that's another value add that you have, so to speak, right? And I think we can do sunshine meetings, right, to kind of discuss this, beat this up a little bit, so it's not catching you guys by surprise at first reading, right? So, you know, what I would encourage you is get with that mentor that you guys have, the council member that brought this issue forward or that's kind of been talking through, and have sunshine meetings, you know, and let us all kind of hash it out, so to speak. So when it goes through first reading, it's not an hour-long discussion, right, at a council meeting, and we're already hitting the strides that at least I benefited greatly from. And I know Councilwoman Morano, I know that some other council members are going to have to see the recording and play catch-up, so to speak, if they're not intimate with the issue. But, you know, to me, the fee is going to be important, right? That it be an equitable fee, that it not be a fee that drives away possible investors, right? But at the same time, make sure that it covers staff times, that there's equal protection, right? The other thing that's important to me, true public purpose, right? We have gymnasiums in the area. We have indoor basketball facilities in the area. We have private lessons that people can take, right? That it not be something that when you add it all up, right, it costs more to go to the P3 than it would to the amenity that already exists, right? That doesn't make sense. So weighing those things, what's a true public purpose? What is the true public good that facility is serving? Those are big questions for me, right? So I don't mind beating those things up, you know, during a sunshine meeting, and you know, get with your mentor, get with the council member that's kind of spearheading this, and invite us all to that meeting, right? And I think that kind of sets the tone for whatever, you know, other questions you have. So we're not on first reading driving you guys, you know, crazy, because that wouldn't be fair to you guys. At least that's my initial imprint on this issue, because you're right. I think it's going to be not traditional, and we don't necessarily get in a lot of debate in first reading. But let's sunshine it, and let's try to beat it up a little bit, so it's not catching us flat-footed, so to speak.
Yeah, council member, I think that'll be the next process, right? Staff will go back. We'll start putting together the bones or the structure of an ordinance, and we'll have in there some decision points. And then we'll figure out a strategy for getting that feedback from the 7 of you before we bring it to you on first reading, whether it be one big sunshine meeting, individual meetings, one-on-one. There's going to be a handful of decision points, some of which the staff here laid out for you tonight. And we'll come up with some recommendations, and then we'll highlight and we'll get that feedback from you, and we'll figure out the best way to do that. And we'll also involve the students in some of that. Yeah. And then we'll, as Lorenzo said, it'll be sometime in the next few months, and we'll start working on it. It's better, I think, instead of to bring back something quickly, I think it'll be better to bring the right product back.
I agree. Thank you.
Okay. I have a final question. I want to thank you for being so patient with me. Okay, so I'm understanding from what we're branching off, we're going to make it more procedural so that it fits what we need. But now, when it came to the unsolicited proposals, there was a lot about going back and forth between like committees, especially for Miami-Dade. So now I'm wondering, would this entail for us in the ordinance to create a committee for these types of projects within the town?
That's going to be a decision point. We could, but at the same time, we may feel that we can have an administrative process, and then you have a committee right here to make the final decision. So the county has a committee because they have a large amount of projects that they need evaluated and go through. In our case, we may not have the same volume, where we can maybe manage it internally with consultant support. So that's going to be the decision point that the council will have to make.
Yeah, because it was definitely like branching off of what Councilwoman Ruano was saying about like not letting just anybody come in here with a check and being like, hey, we want to do this.
100%, but there will always be a committee that will evaluate the solicitation. Just know that that's always a step in our procurement process, to have an evaluation committee designated to evaluate the RFQ, that first contract I talked about, then that second contract in the RFP. There will be evaluation committees made up from whoever the manager determines or the electeds determine to evaluate a proposed contract opportunity.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. And everybody's good. I guess we'll just adjourn this meeting, but look forward to the next one. You guys have an open door in town hall, so feel free to bounce any ideas off the mentor council person that's helping you, or staff. Staff is readily available, and I saw a lot of eagerness in Tony to make sure that you guys are involved in the process. So thank you so much for being here. Again, you guys are taking a lot of time, and that really speaks to the work ethic that you guys have. I saw Marit's documenting a little bit. Would you guys want to come up here and take a picture? Come on up and come up to the dais and take a picture.